Hi, Chris, and welcome to our In Conversation with series. We're very grateful to have you join us. And so, Chris, you wear a number of hats, and one is the Propositions and Solutions Director at Equinity. But today we're talking to Chris, the chair of the PASA Pensions Dashboard Working Group. And PASA, for those who don't know, is the Pensions Administration Standards Association. And so now that we've got a proper pensions dashboard program from MAPS, another acronym, Money and Pension Service, things are progressing along. And your PASA working group has also issued guidance to help schemes, trustees, and providers get ready for the rollout, which is now 2023. Is that correct?
Certainly. So in terms of overall timelines, then you're right. There'll be an alpha project to actually build industry architecture later this year. That will go on into the end of first quarter next year. And then there'll be a number of beta phases with anyone who is brave enough to volunteer to go early. The legal compulsion for data providers, that being the schemes and the insurers, will start from April 23 onwards. And what onwards means is probably a similar series of windows like we had when auto enrolment started. But that's currently out for further call for input. That call for input came out just last week.
Okay, so for today's session, what we're going to try and avoid is the immediate practicalities of the project, because I think that's been obviously dealt with through the MAPS program. But what we really wanted to do and get your thoughts on is beyond the implementation. What's the future for pensions dashboard and open finance? But before we just get to the juicy part there, I think there might be some people out there who are a little unsure what pensions dashboard is about. And so maybe you could just talk us through that very briefly, and then we'll get on to the open finance.
Yeah, certainly. So the goals of the pension dashboard program is to reconnect everybody with their pensions. And then at a sort of rolling phase of reconnect, then understand, and then give them enough information and knowledge that they could start to act on it. So those are the three aims. So the first sort of find or reconnect, understand, act. So what that does for probably the first time in our industry, the pensions part of the industry at least, is actually raise the bar for how digitally connected all this information now needs to be. So that's one of the fundamental differences that pensions dashboard needs to overcome, that some of the earlier enablers like open banking didn't quite have the same problems with. So open banking has been an amazing first step, and it's waking people up to what could be possible. And now pensions dashboard is probably the same again, but with lots more complication.
Is it worth, Chris? I know those of us around dashboard have either listened to or have had to explain the major difference between open banking and pension dashboard, because a lot of people previously said, "I'll just follow the open banking model." Is it worth you just highlighting the key differences before we get on to the funky?
Yeah. I think I'll start with just the little brief similarities, because I think some people, when they think about, "I'll just do that again," have forgotten that actually open banking needed legal compulsion to kick it off as well. And that's what we're wrestling with at the minute at the start of the pension dashboard program. You know, lots of people doing lots of great things in the pensions industry, but there's also a lot of work. There's a lot of day job going on. So, you know, they also needed that sort of legal compulsion to say, okay, I like the idea of dashboards, but unless there's legislation to make me do it, it's not going to come higher up my priorities. So we're in the same place there that open banking had. And I think the differences then sort of start to diverge. One, scale and variety, both the number of banks that exist to have to come together, the variety of products. There are lots of banking type products, but you know, it's very easy to see that the various different types of bank account all actually technically behave very similarly. We've got a vast wider range of pensions and savings and investment products that all come under the generic banner of pensions. And then just a simple number. I mean, we're probably looking at something like possibly up to something like 80,000 data endpoints to go and look for pensions. And then that leads us to the sort of behavioural aspects, is that on balance, people know where their bank accounts are. And that certainly isn't true when you start getting out into shareholdings, pensions, and other investment type products. It's very easy to forget, or either forget that you have one, or even realise you ever had one. So I think those scale of changes takes open banking and just multiplies it up.
I was just going to ask Chris about the Pensions Act. Is that right? That's legislating for schemes to be involved in pensions dashboard. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's primary legislation. So that kind of brings, along with things like new CDC schemes and things of that nature, it brought pension dashboards into reality. So we definitely now know it's going ahead. The secondary legislation that will be drafted back end of the summer and then consulted upon in December is really the detail. So what do I have to send? How long have I got to send it? Those sorts of things. And that's what I'm helping MAPS write at the minute.
That's a really good, concise intro. Can we get, Justine, if okay with you, do you think it's good if we move on to now how this could evolve and spread out into what's been sort of bracketed open finance more generally? So we had the concept of open savings and investments before. That's open finance seems to be getting a bit broader now, which is cool. And if you can, I was thinking how to get the best out of your brain in this time that we've got. If you could think about how it might impact different stakeholders around the place. So probably best to start, I guess, with members, customers, but up to you, Chris, wherever you think the most.
Well, I think for me, the most important thing is that pension dashboard shouldn't be seen as an end game. Obviously, a lot of the work that's being done now, I think, is just an enabler for a greater view of pensions as part of people's wider view of wealth. I think pensions just probably is starting from a bit further back and has got a lot more to do under the auspices of the pension dashboard program. We need to tackle things like digital identification. We need to tackle things like the security model and the circle of trust, because a person will go to a dashboard. The dashboard will communicate to industry architecture. Industry architecture will go and search all the pension schemes and insurers. The pension schemes and insurers are the data controllers, or at least the trustees and the product owners are, but they have no legal relationship with the websites that the people are using. So there's quite a bit to go around there as well. It's another subtle difference in open banking. With open banking, the user journey is I go to my banking app, I add my other bank accounts in. Whereas this is a search model, it's a federated search model, it's federated security, and all these sorts of things are cracking on. All of it are massive enablers. So once you've done that, what's stopping the app economy taking that up and saying, right, okay, well, we can do bank accounts, and now we can do pensions alongside that. What else could we do? Well, the other open savings and open investment products that are out there, and you can start bringing those together to show people what they hold rather than treating everything in silos like we traditionally have done.
I think from my perspective, obviously, for me, the open finance cannot progress without this foundation work that the pensions dashboard is providing. So without the digital ID, the security, the governance, and that sort of infrastructure, it is really laying the foundations, and it does come across as a lot more complex because, they say there's only 9 banks, but we've got 40 or whatever, how many thousands of schemes out there, which have a variety of ways of showing their information and types of pensions, DC, DB. So I'm just wondering, that's all done, and we can now get on to see a dashboard. Yeah. What's that dashboard going to?
Magic wand. Yeah.
The magic, just wave it, okay? And I've now got my pension. And we're now talking about open finance with banking. But what else is there? Is there a connection here with Amazon? Is there a connection there with other brands like that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic that will be created by having all of the raw data just generally more digitally enabled. A few times I've described dashboard as just the enabler along a journey to other stuff. It's a question of who does the other stuff, And at the minute, a lot of the products we are actually talking about, for various reasons, are very heavily regulated. So that might still be a challenge for organizations that might be really hyper digitally aware, got really good customer user experience journeys, and people that design these things in minutes and have got apps updating every fortnight on the App Store and all those great things. But if they're not FCA regulated, they're not going to be allowed to be a dashboard. And you understand the security and sense of that, but you do wonder if that then will, at somewhere down the line, be a bit of a disincentive for people who actually want to be good customer experience apps, helping people understand their generic wealth. And so that's something we need to bear in mind. You know, where do we find the balance of safety, security, being able to roll things back when it goes wrong and pay those, you know, restitution fees and all those good things that come with being FCA regulated or being covered by the regulator, all those sorts of things. Doesn't quite sit with the wild west of app economy, you know, so there's going to have to be some work done there as well.
If we bring it back to pensions for a second, and we, as Justine said, we fast forward, we've been implemented, and now members, customers have got much more transparency, right, than they've ever had before. If you couple that with generational change and what people expect anyway, and you also combine it with the right from DB to DC, do you think something's going to dramatically change with this pension system in terms of the centricity of the employer versus the employee? Can you see something happening around that? I wondered if, you know, in this recent consultation paper that came out a couple of weeks ago, which was mainly, wasn't it, about charges, actually, simplification of charges, but there was this allusion to employees choosing where their employer contributions get routed in the future. And I just wonder whether all these things coming together, you can foresee some sort of change in the system or centricity.
I can certainly see it again being a massive enabler for that sort of thing, because even if we take dashboard principles and then just multiply them out for the rest of the financial services industry, then, you know, find, understand, act. It is quite a sensible set of stepping stones. So we're almost jumping straight into the act now. So if people actually realise what they've got and go some way, I mean, I've never think they'll ever understand all these products fully, but if they at least understand what it means to them, then you're in a better position to be able to make those decisions. And of course, the other thing, as well as understanding, is you need the data available as well to make clear decisions. So all of that just gets enabled by these facilities, and moving forwards, you get people who are not experienced in, say, direct to consumer world, who suddenly have to be a bit better at that sort of attitude. You know, you can draw dividing lines in the pensions industry almost anywhere you choose, whatever suits your story. But I think there are two principal ways in which you look at pensions as one of these products. Is that they're pensions that you either almost don't know you've got because it's a benefit of being employed and it's almost given to you, or there are pensions you have consciously chosen to buy. And you could argue that the people who buy them should be a bit more engaged. They've chosen to buy them. And you could argue that auto-enrollment has meant people are less likely to know they're in a pension because they haven't chosen. There's just an absence of choosing not to join. So we've switched that sort of nudge or inertia switch there to get more people into pension schemes. That doesn't mean they understand them any better. I think those who have that sort of D2C more mentality probably do a bit more today to try and say, this is why you should have a pension, this is why you should pay more money in, this is why you should do X, Y, and Z. And that mentality might seep through into, actually, if I was going to start a company tomorrow with a blank sheet of paper about what would be my product mix, you know, already I think we can assume no one's going to offer another DB scheme ever again. We have the interesting ability now to look at collective DC, which for the early schemes going through that new regulation look an awful lot like DB schemes, but the benefits themselves aren't guaranteed to go up. You know, they may come down. So, but the mechanics of it are still fairly DB-ish. But actually, we might criticise big employers in the gig economy. You know, see Uber or whoever almost being pilloried for not offering benefits. And their argument, which you can't say is wrong, particularly, especially if you don't work in that industry, is do the people who work in that industry who want that job temporarily actually want that benefit? So I think if benefits generically are easier to interact with, easier to choose between, and make a conscious understanding choice before making it, then I do think it will give employers and other people who want to sell, directly to consumers, the ability to just be able to make that choice much more readily and on the device that they want to. They won't have to go into a branch to have an interview and go through an IFA conversation. And equally, the other side to that journey for taking people on, selling them new products or switching their products, then that whole sort of paraplanner stage of everything, of hoovering up all the other data, all the know your customer stuff, all of the what else have you got, all of that stuff is more readily at someone's fingertips. Then that's going to take a lot of friction out of the process as well, and probably a lot of paraplanners out of the process as well.
But, so it's going back. So are you saying, did I just catch that right at the end there? You said you're going to take paraplanners out of the process.
Well, I think there's an awful lot of research that paraplanners need to do, because they deal with customers who don't know what they've got. I still think that those people are important, and they still bring sense to a lot of data, because we know from experience of our MAPS guiders, the people attached to sort of citizens advice bureaus, who say the most common interaction with somebody who doesn't understand their pensions is the person coming into a room with a carrier bag full of paper saying, what does this mean? So there's always that role for that guider, whatever we call them. It's just that if we make some of the activities easier for that guider to do, certainly the sort of private eye stuff they might have to do to find stuff, then it just makes the whole process sort of have less friction.
Yeah, you're just thinking about the role of the financial advisor with pensions dashboard and how that interaction will change, and time and therefore money being spent on just trying to find stuff isn't time well spent. So could the advice gap be closed a little bit with pensions dashboards, and then making that advice process more efficient, and that would be maybe generating more clients for financial advisors?
I think so, and I think it increases the ability for better automated tools to be reviewing this information as well, which would also bring down the cost of advice, because you could almost get to a stage where the IFA can focus on where the money's going, not where it's coming from. So it can sort of do the investment advice piece that's actually quite important, and doesn't rely so much on where the money has come from. You can almost build those kind of triage type systems, whether you call them robo advice or whatever, but some form of triage of the information. The information is more readily available. The information is more standardized to make it more digitally available. You could write cleverer rules engines to go through that, because there'll be less variety for them to be programmed in, so that you kind of rule out some of those human mistakes that can be made, like missing a benefit or not understanding that a benefit has a DB which with hidden spouses guarantee somewhere that wasn't obvious from the third page of the benefit statement your customer gave you. There's all those things to get ironed out of the process, and you spend a lot more time programming Happy Path rather than having to worry about all the things that could have gone wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that one. It is one aspect of the future, which I think, and we've talked about the decline of DB, but there will still be quite a lot of wealth that could benefit, subject to proper advice, a transfer value at some point in time. And it may be that off a dashboard, automated rules could be aware of all the benefits and support those decisions. So that's quite interesting, whether it could close the advice gap or help to close the advice gap in the future.
Yeah.
What do you think, Chris, happens to employers and EBCs as the sort of the that side of the market? Do they become less important in the future, or do they just have a different role, or no change at all?
I think you can probably look back at the last 10 years, and almost everyone who's anyone selling products in this market has all been wanting to get into the employer channel to be their route to sell product. So you can see that some people have been very good at that, and others still really probably haven't tapped the potential of that. I still think in an employer-sponsored benefit, be it a pension or a group savings account or whatever sidecar benefit it might be, I think you'll not get away from the fact that employees trust their employer more than they trust the financial services industry, or at least not for a while. So I don't think it changes very much for them. I think it might give them a bit more choice, a bit more flexibility as to actually, could I offer different benefits? You know, it might not always be a pension, or it might not always be that pension. We just have this kind of legal point that the employer has to offer one. But actually what the definition of that pension might be isn't defined in that legislation. It's just, you've got to have this sort of level of contribution, this level of salary coverage for all those contributions. This is how it's defined. So I think you might see EBCs or employers, you know, possibly offering more flexible products that at least meet the legal compliance minimum, but offer something that they believe their workforce actually is asking for or would benefit from.
Interesting. Can I ask a question about another stakeholder in the market, which is often not thought of as a stakeholder? Scammers.
Oh yeah.
Right. So scammers, or those that would do us harm. I'm sure that you and your colleagues are really protecting against this in the design. In fact, I know you are. But can you see, again, fast forward a bit, get your crystal ball out. Can you see risks in this system of centralising all this data, and how we need to be vigilant, keep on top of it?
Oh, completely. And I would say the risks are probably more manifest in the design than actually things like usability at the stage. You know, you're always trying to think, right, how can we stop it from going wrong? And then you might think about, how can we make that a bit better for the member to enjoy? So yeah, absolutely. Risk first. You know, you would call it a people-centric program, and I believe it is, but I think we have to recognise that some of those people are bad actors. So it's interesting, the conversations that have been around how do we do secure access for an IFA or for an advisor, or even that kind of unofficial over-the-shoulder advisor, like, oh, can my next door neighbour help me with this? You know, that kind of thing. So we talk about all those sorts of things. So the security around dashboard, you know, one of the principles will be this user managed access piece. So the person using the tool is the person responsible for approving other people to see what they're doing, or also be able to act on their behalf. So that's being wrapped up not just from a GDPR perspective, but also what does the user journey look like, so that they understand the permissions they're given. So there's a lot of good work that's gone into that. Thankfully, I've not to do that bit, because that's not my game at all. But we look at more things of the data security, and it's easy to think about data security in terms of, you know, is that encrypted? Is the back end encrypted? Is the traffic encrypted? All those sorts of controls, which of course in the rounds are all play their part. One of the big concerns for me is, how do you stop the scammer representing themselves either as the IFA, either, you know, the direction of attack is via the front end, pretending to be someone they're not, or pretending to be a friend of the member when they're not. But also, actually, could they scam their way into the system by being a fake data provider? So, you know, if the industry widget that's got to find where everyone's pensions, it will be sending pellets of personal data out into the system. It'll come to me as with my equality hat on, saying, have you got a pension for John May? Here's his address, here's his date of birth, here's his NI number. Does it match any of your records? Is there a way in which I might have set myself up as a fake pension scheme somewhere, that actually this tool becomes an automatic spammer's paradise, that they don't have to buy people's marketing lists anymore? They can just basically sit back and hoover up every dashboard search request. Like, never return any answers, just hoover up all this personal data. So that's another sort of attack vector we've got to think about, that when you join everything up, you know, goes without saying, everything's joined up.
Thinking there, John, I was just going to say about I think a lot of people do think that pensions dashboard is going to just be another data warehouse, but that's not the plan. It's going to be, I don't know what you would call it, but they're going to be pulling the information direct. Yeah. So I think
that's a fair point. I mean, there are still people who don't understand that, because actually some people have looked at what other European dashboards do, and some do that. So some dashboards across Europe are pump this data in, update it every quarter, whatever, and there's just one massive data lake in the middle, and that solves an awful lot of architectural problems. I think those approaches wouldn't necessarily work in our variety, but there's been a lot of worry. You'll probably see some of the Lord's amendments that went through the Pensions Act last year about trying to prevent there being multiple dashboards, trying to prevent those dashboards from being transactional, trying to prevent those dashboards, and it's all kind of more fear than knowledge that, oh no, we don't want that. It's got to be a government dashboard and nothing else. And that's not necessarily what everyone's actually asking for. But I think the fear is potentially that they think data gets sent somewhere. And whilst that is true, it gets sent inside the transaction. So user goes to dashboard goes to the identity service and said, is this user real? Oh yeah, okay, fine. So pension finder service, find if you've got any pensions for John May. That find gets sent out to up to, oh, this is not this many, but potentially 80,000 little data endpoints somewhere saying, do you know John May? And then the 5 or 6 that do know him will actually send a secure token back to the dashboard. So none of that find information goes back into industry architecture. It doesn't sit anywhere. It's not residing in a lake to be hacked. Can you hack a lake? Anyway, it will go straight back to the dashboard where the member's request was from. And then that dashboard will then collect what all those tokens are. Let's say it's 5, 6, 7 tokens. And then it will just use those individual tokens to go and get the benefit information directly. So you get this massive distributed search in the first finds process. But once they've been found, it's a data transaction secured from the back end to the member dashboard and back again, and nowhere else. So of course, under GDPR, the member has the rights to have that data taken somewhere else as well, and they give that permission. So if the insurer is up at the dashboard and then wants to take the member on an accumulation journey, wants to start giving them financial advice or retirement planning, that's fine, but they've left the dashboard. So the dashboard eco structure is in the rear window. They've moved on a journey, and they're allowed to take that data with them through that journey because GDPR allows them to do that. In fact, it allows you to have your data presented wherever you want. But the data providers need to check that where you've asked to send it is secure. So there's lots of existing control in place for all of that.
Go back to something we touched on earlier, which is this possible concept in the future of employees choosing, right, where their employer contributions get routed. So at the moment, the employer makes the choice of the scheme, right? And I don't want to reference too much the Australian model, but let's just for a minute play with it, where you've got you've got the other side of the spectrum where the customer, the member, chooses the fund. Now, if we start to move so firstly, probably should ask you whether you think we might move in that direction in the future. And then if so, how does the whole dynamic of the infrastructure in the UK pension system start to change if it does? You might say, no, I don't think that'll ever happen, in which case the second bit's irrelevant.
I think we'd move in a direction of more choice. I don't know the Australian model particularly well, but I think we can already see flavours of it in the UK because, you've got people like Nest talking about sidecar benefits and other things. So I can see the direction of travel being broadly similar. Is that, pensions are a legal compliance issue for employers. They have to provide something in that nature. It might not be the right solution, or it's certainly a sort of sledgehammer solution. If you're going to say, I'm going to design a pension scheme that works for my 20-year-old leaving school or college, and it works for my 60-year-olds that are thinking about how they're about to get paid in their retirement, then, you can see why it's difficult to design a product that works everywhere for everybody. So I can see there being a world where, subject to whether legislation can change in this direction to be as flexible. But if I want to be the honest employer that says, okay, I recognise pension doesn't work for everyone, perhaps I do something else for them, or part of their contributions are perhaps in something that is more readily reusable in the lifetime ISA style. I've got some important life events I want to fund. Almost like the American model actually of actually being able to do loan backs from pension funds in a way. And I'm not advocating that exact same model, but just recognizing that people will want different things through their life. And you might just use the kind of nudge or the sort of inertia model as well, just to make sure they're leaving something in a pension, even though it might not be the best thing for them at that moment. Because I know we've done for years, professional pensions used to run, 30-minute interviews with people every week. And one of the last questions is always pension or ISA. And I say, well, why does that have to be a one-off decision? Because frankly, anyone they ever interviewed in the pensions industry always said both. Why couldn't it be almost at the contribution level? Do I want to top up my pension a bit? And perhaps some of these sidecar benefits or something more flexible, perhaps is the replacement model for ABCs. If I can just pay more into a pension anyway, the ABC bit as a sidecar isn't so relevant. But perhaps I could, funnel some money into a G ISA or something, as well, because I know I could pull it back out if I needed to. I think the challenge, there's a legislation need for the employer to offer a pension anyway. That's one hurdle to overcome. But also the fact we also need to know that some of these products are just quite different to each other in how they're run. Some of these products are, have caste considerations and all those kind of things. Some don't. Some, even more broadly, simply, some you're collecting your money, others you're not. Those kind of things. So I get it, it's not going to be quite so easy underneath the surface, but if the need is to go back to genuinely being an employer who can offer a benefit package that attracts people, that's not just salary and cash, then I think these flexible models need to evolve.
I was going to ask, has there been much thought around the post-retirement, at retirement market for pensions, dashboard or open finance? Because I suppose we're talking about trying to get people to save more for their retirement, but with obviously the demographics of the population topsy-turvy, could there be more retired people looking at their pensions dashboard or wanting to be more engaged?
Yeah, so initially the scope is focused on is recognizing that the first pension dashboard can't do everything. It can't catch up to the Swedish model or whatever in one go. There's so many different things we have to put in place to enable that. So one of the scope reductions for what we'll call like the minimum viable product of dashboard 1 is that people already in payment are not in scope. The concept being they don't need reconnecting, they don't really need to understand it, and they don't need to act because they've already done that. They're drawing their pension. So I get the logic. Ironically, it's probably the easiest part of the data in our markets that we could actually provide to a dashboard, because we're fairly confident those people live where they say they live because we've gone through that. We've just done a transaction. We're regularly paying them. We're probably doing proof of life, at least yearly to make sure they're still there and still, whatever the phrase is, living as stated. So ironically, it would have been probably the easier part to do, but it also means it would be an easy part to add on later, because you might take the view that if you just see the pensions you haven't claimed yet, yes, you'll be reconnected with ones you may have forgotten about, or you may be reconnected with a pension that you had with an employer that doesn't exist anymore, and you've got no idea who Equinity are, who have now got it for you and are looking after it for you. So there's 2 layers of reconnection. But I do wonder whether there'll be people, now that retirement isn't an event anymore, it's probably a number of events or a phasing from one to the other. I kind of think for a holistic planning purposes, you kind of need to know what is in payment and what isn't. Yeah. Because a lot of the way IFAs deal with those sorts of things is some kind of income modelling. So you kind of need to know what the income bit is. So if we've excluded that from dashboard, and again, I get that we've excluded it in 1.0, but I think it's got to come in dashboard 2.0 or whatever that becomes. And it's definitely got to come before you do, or as part of doing a wider open finance, because income modelling is the way in which you work out how the product mix works, because all the products have got different tax bases. Some are obviously income tax efficient and others, are paid net after you've paid your tax. There's all that the IFA needs to just get their head around. or the automated tool needs to get its head around to make sure it's making the right advice. Otherwise you could make all the right advice for investments, and then kind of trip over the tax treatment of all the deductions and all the decumulations.
Mm-hmm. So I was just going on the other side then with the likes of all these master trusts and auto enrollment, and perhaps younger people, and even with the way the economy is, happening, people switching jobs quite a lot. There is a problem, isn't there, with small deferred pots sitting with different.
So I think it's funny how these things come around again. So you've got the challenge of dashboard kind of came about because government or treasury kind of wanted industry to sort its act out on pension transfers, and the pot follows member debate. That didn't go anywhere for lots of different reasons. So they said, right, well, you've got to do a better job of at least telling everyone where their pensions are. Hence, more fire was lit under dashboard. The industry's moved on. There's been lots of things like the Star Alliance and Origo options, and all those kind of things are available now to make those transfers simpler than they were even those few years ago when we started talking about pot follows member in, what was that, 2014, 2015. And now you've got the small pots issue is kind of going around that same circle again, because you could have a high volume of low value transactions, which suits an automated solution. And if we can get away, if those small pots haven't reached the threshold, certainly if they're small little DB deferred things that haven't reached the threshold of 30,000 transfer value, you haven't got the advice loop that you have to think about. But a lot of these pots will be DC. There'll be people who auto-enrolled who worked for a company for 6 months and then left, and all those kind of things. So the nest model is okay because you never really leave nest. It's just you're either contributing currently or you're not contributing currently. So if you go into 3 or 4 jobs that are all with nest, your money will just pick up again and carry on. So that's fine. But there's millions of other pots out there that aren't in that sort of model. So automating the transfers, again, having the background data just digitally enabled for dashboard is just a big enabler to then say, well, if I can show it on a dashboard, I can at least remind the member they've got it. So whether we end up with a user pull model where they'll go, oh, I've started job B, I'll go to the dashboard, I'll click on the button to job A and say, right, I'm over here now, can you transfer it, please? That's one model. And one of the other models that the small pots group is looking at as to whether you could proactively push the pots on so that they're not left behind and orphaned.
John, is there something similar in Australia? I can't. Do you know?
Well, of course, you don't have the challenge so much because you take your pot with you.
With you.
As you change employer, you've still got your, I'm contributing and my employer contributes to my fund. I can switch fund if another super fund markets themselves better to me or changes their terms to, that suits me better. So you don't have that same challenge. Now they had a history to get over to get to where they are now. But again, it's why my slightly dreamy world thinks there's a lot of things pushing. Maybe it takes 5 or 10 years, and I'd love to talk back, Chris, about timing, that we might start to edge towards that sort of model because there are so many things pushing it in that direction. Mm-hmm. But on timing, Chris, can I talk to you about that? So earlier, we talked about 2023 is an important year.
Yeah.
For many reasons. But then you have this sort of A style rollout.
Yeah. What
does the sort of shape of the curve look like? Do you get over a big hump of it then and then do that, or is it? So
the hope and some of the models that are described in the call for input on staging is aimed at, do we get to this magic dashboards available point, i.e. the effective go live of public dashboards? Do we get there sooner, depending on who we stage first? And of course the answer must be yes. For those people who remember some of the tsunami curves that were drawn for auto enrollment, that you get this kind of, you get the number of employers starts really low and starts ramping up, but then in like 2018, 2019, when the micros, the number of employers just went, but the number of members being added was tailing off. So I can see something fairly similar. So some of the options on the call for input for staging are talking about, is it worth doing the more modern automated schemes first because they're easier from a technology point of view, and it's also where quite a lot of the members are. So notwithstanding the fact that Nest are changing suppliers right at the right time in terms of the staging dates, but aside from those challenges that everyone will have some flavour of, if you could get Nest, some of the bigger master trusts, People's, and some of the bigger, more automated DB schemes, I think we get to, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think there's something like 80 schemes will give you something like 90% of all the membership records, if we assume that the state pension is in that lump as well. Because I think we're talking about potentially, including state pension benefits, we're talking about something like 100 million entitlements that are out there. But you get through an awful lot of them just by picking the largest providers and largest insurers in that first wave. The numbers obviously won't quite work like that, because even if you go to a large employer and say you've got 1 million members, we'll have those please, you'll find that you can't do all of them. So there will always be some that don't quite work or whatever. But yeah, the dashboard availability point, which is the sort of almost like data-led decision as to whether you start publicising dashboards publicly or not, could be quite quick in 2023, depending on how many of the big ones go first. But of course, there will be long tails. But again, it'll be a bit like auto enrolment. You'll be going through lots and lots of very small pension schemes to find very small numbers of entitlements.
I'm just sorry, John. I was going to ask a final question, but have you got one more for Chris?
Yeah, still about timing. So if again, I quite like the optimistic path where 23 is quite a material year because of the choices that are made about which schemes on board. So how soon after 23 do you think you start to see some resulting innovation? Some of the stuff that we've been talking about earlier in the session, could it be quite? I'm sort of hoping it'll be quite soon after 23 actually, because once it's almost like you open the door and things should start happening.
Yeah, so I think the sort of the brake levers on some of the innovation are still around the fact that it's going to be an FCA regulated activity to be a dashboard. So whilst that's nice and safe and secure for a new service, something we're breaking new ground on, I think that also means that you won't see innovation perhaps quite so quickly as you might hope. I think there'll be something about bedding in. There's all this matching work, are we being secure and not sending the wrong people's data around? Will take a while to bed in, because there's only a year of beta, so you only get to sort of thrash out so much of this stuff before it really goes live. And then you get the sort of user experience. Is there enough information around the estimated retirement income number that's going to be sent, where we have no UK uniform way of doing that? How confusing that's going to be. I can probably see refinement in the offer before I see innovation, because I think innovation comes when actually, because widows can already do their own bank account and their own pension side by side. Will we see more of that for those FCA regulated entities? I can see that happening quite quickly afterwards to say, well, do you want to see all your other pensions as well? Here you go. That will happen quite quickly, I think, and they will have some leeway in finessing what the user experience is. Insurers who are targeting the youth end of the market, insurers who target the sort of retirement asset end of the market, would very necessarily write different user experiences. It goes without saying. Trouble is, I don't know how strict the design standards for being a dashboard are going to be, because some of those will be embedded in legislation in a kind of risk avoidance way, to make sure that if you are presenting dashboard information, you must do it like this. And then when you take them beyond dashboard and into, as you say, into a aggregation journey or into a retirement planning journey, you're not in the dashboard now. So I can see easily that that's where the innovation comes. Now I've got all your automatic information. Look what I can do with it. Come to me. I think that's where the innovation goes. But I think we'll see my personal view anyway, I think we'll see quite a large sort of ring fence around what is a dashboard and what isn't in those first sets of regs.
Thanks.
So, Chris, this is our final question for you, and it's one that we ask all of our.
It's like Columbo, isn't it? Just
one
more thing.
Just one more thing. So, and it's. I'm trying to work out how to word it for you, because you've got so many hats, and there's so much that the pensions dashboard, all the different work streams that are going on with digital identity and the rollout. But if you could have some sort of pensions dashboard superhero, wave your wizard wand, what would you want from the industry to make pensions dashboard and open finance successful?
I think it's slightly dull, but I think if I was going to wave a magic wand anywhere, it would be to get everybody who looks after data today to do a better job of it. We do so much work, and we do work hard, but kind of as an as-needs basis. I think if the as-needs basis becomes, well, dashboards are 24/7, it raises the bar and it helps. It's slightly more stick than carrot. But I think when people can actually see, and to be fair to most trustees in industry and people we spoke to, people always want to do dashboard. They believe it's the right thing to do. It's just that when you've got GMP equalisation, you've got McLeod, you've got whatever else, you've got scheme funding. I can see why people spend more money on protecting their members' benefits rather than sticking them on a website. I get that, I really do. But I think generally they need to recognise now that an investment in your data and your processes to make the data clean just makes everything else so much more possible. And I hope that with my magic wand, people will see dashboard as this is not quite the straw that broke the camel's back, but the final realisation that actually what I get in, I will get back.
That's very good, very good. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. I think we covered quite a lot of topics, open finance, the security, the role of the member, being more of a customer, at retirement as well. What else did we cover? Scammers, and going back full circle back to lost small pots and what we're going to do about that in the future. But yeah, data quality always seems to be a topical subject when it comes to pensions dashboard. And I suppose from my point of view, I would have hoped that wouldn't be such a big ask, that it would be standard, that data would be looked after. But yeah, this is where we are. So thank you very much.